plans to permanently station nuclear-capable bombers in Australia. It's one of the stories we have on the rundown today. How would the expansion of the US military presence affect the balance of power in the Asia Pacific? How big a deal is this?
Oh, I think it's very, very dangerous. Now they're talking about putting nuclear missiles possibly in Finland, right? I mean, nuclear missiles possibly in Finland, right? I mean, we are getting closer to a nuclear conflict. And by putting missiles closer to China, closer to Russia, is only making the world a more dangerous place. Again, we have to remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. The United States in 1962 wouldn't tolerate for 1 minute the idea of missiles being in Cuba, right? We almost went to nuclear war over it. That situation was resolved through negotiations very quickly, I think within 13 days or so. But we don't see or understand or empathize with the similar security concerns of Russia and China, the kind of reverse Cuban Missile Crisis situation.
But indeed, it's the rhetoric as well. You've got the US accusing Moscow of ramping up nuclear talk, rhetoric, and putting up fear. But yet, as you say in Finland, you've got the US proposing to put nuclear weapons on the very doorstep of Russia.
Yeah, well, again, it's projecting. It's projecting onto our enemies our own misdeeds. And on top of all that, the Biden administration apparently has now changed our nuclear protocol. I mean, apparently we're now open to a first strike against Russia, against China, for the first time in history has that protocol changed to that, from being purely defensive to a possible first strike. So, again, I see the West, I see the U.S. in particular, as waving the nuclear saber much more than Russia is.
Dan, I've been here a few years, and I've noticed in the speeches by the Russian leader, he was quite respectful in the past, but now he's very direct with his words when it comes to Europe and the US. Just to give you an example, he recently said that Western hegemony is a dirty, bloody, and dangerous game. What do you think he was focusing on there when he said things like that?
Well, I think he's referring to incidents since the collapse of the Soviet Union, where you did have basically unchecked U.S. power. And what was it used for? To bomb Yugoslavia for 78 days, to invade Iraq twice, to invade Afghanistan and occupy it for 20 years, to support a terrible war in Yemen that has created the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, to destroy Libya. I mean, on and on. That is what U.S. hegemony has meant in the world. And I think why you see most of the world, meaning Latin America, Africa, most of Asia, supporting Russia right now is because they are tired of U.S. hegemony and they want that end.
And again, that point doesn't really get risen, does it, in the West? When we talk about the world, it's seen from a very Western point of view. There's a big world out there with their own worries, their own problems, and their own relations and ties with Russia that's not being spoken about.
No, and again, very relevant. You just saw Lula da Silva elected in Brazil. Those types of leaders being elected throughout Latin America. I mean, you almost have a clean sweep. These are leaders that are also critical of U.S. intervention, of the Monroe Doctrine, of U.S. hegemony. That's happening for a reason. People are tired. They have seen the results of that. The result of U.S. hegemony has been war and destruction, and I think the world is fed up.
Are we living through the change in the global world order right now?
I think we are. I think, there's many birth pains to it, but yeah, we are seeing the birth of a multipolar world.
Interesting. Just one last note while we have you, Dan. The Israeli elections are happening right now. Lots of machinations politically, but on the background to that, you've got Palestinians in contested occupied territories, not allowed to stand, not allowed even to vote. They've got no say in those elections. I put it to you, why is that not, I know we've spoken about it, but why is that not touched upon in the West, whereas many, many headlines about what happened in Iran, the tragic death of a woman in Iranian custody happened, but there's such a disparity in the column inches given to both things.
Yeah, well, Noam Chomsky used to talk about the worthy and unworthy victims. The worthy victims, meaning those who deserve inches of news coverage, are people in countries that the U.S. doesn't like, right? Adversary, enemy countries. We focus on those victims. We don't focus on the victims of the U.S. and its allies like Israel. We downplay those victims. In the U.S., for example, there's 40 to 50 women killed a year by police, right? That's not discussed in light of what happened in Iran. And again, when you look at what's happening, particularly in Gaza, you have one of, again, the worst humanitarian crises on earth being created by Israel, by its blockade of Gaza, by its war crimes in Gaza. And again, that is off limits to discuss because Israel is such a close ally of the United States.
Well, Dan, you're not off limits to this program. It is such a pleasure to have you here and discussing all those topics with us. Dan Kovalik, human and labour rights lawyer, live and direct. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Neil. Appreciate it.
Now, China is warning of a potential arms race pushed forward by Washington after it emerged that the US is planning to deploy, as we spoke about, up to 6 nuclear-capable B-52 bombers in northern Australia.
The relevant U.S. behaviors have increased regional tensions, seriously undermined regional peace and stability, and may trigger an arms race in the region.
The investigation by Australia's ABC television network claims Washington is seeking to house the bombers at the Tyndall Air Base that's south of Darwin, the regional capital of the Northern Territory. It said the project will cost upwards of $100 million. All the work is due to be completed within 4 years. Well, we got a comment on the deployment of the B-52 bombers from the Pentagon. It says the rotational presence of US aircraft in Australia is a part of the two nations' cooperation. And the statement also highlighted the Pentagon's, quote, investment and commitment to Australia. Well, the director of the Centre for Counter-Hegemonic Studies think tank, that's Tim Anderson. He is of the view that people in Australia are concerned that a military conflict could break out between the US and China.
It's really a terrible development which is scaring a lot of people in Australia, no matter what their political persuasion, because they know that China, which is non-threatening to Australia, and which is Australia's largest trading partner, has been for some time, it's an impossible task to step into a conflict with a power that big and for no real reason. And unfortunately, it's being done simply because of the dependence of successive governments in Australia on their role to play a supporting role to the US, in which the US has launched itself onto this aggression against China because of extreme jealousy, it seems. So, unfortunately, our dependent politics is really creating a huge dilemma.
Meanwhile, in a separate military development, Japan says it's considering increasing the range of its new high-speed missile to beyond 1,000 kilometers. Now, that would put coastal areas of China and North Korea within range. However, sources within the country claim the improvements to the projectile, which is still under development, would facilitate better defenses of Japan's remote islands.